We're going to meet a ghost today. It's known as the myth of escalation, and it's haunted the foreign policy of the United States as it relates to Vladimir Putin for decades. Through this discussion, I'm hopeful that we can have a road to Damascus moment in our foreign policy. You see, this doctrine has had the opposite effect of what we intend. Rather than reducing tensions and leading to peace, it has had the opposite effect and led this nation and the world to the most dangerous geopolitical situation of my lifetime. And frankly, I'm not that young. We're going to look at the facts and the evidence, totally clear, and it proves we need a radical new approach with respect to Russia and its so-called leader. Okay, boys and girls, I'm going to make this simple. Let's look at our history in dealing with Vladimir Putin over approximately 20 years and see if our actions in trying to placate him and de-escalate all the time has caused him to moderate his conduct and act like a normal, good partner in international relations, or if instead it has had the opposite effect and made him worse and worse and worse and caused him to keep pushing and pushing and pushing. Spoiler alert, it's the latter, not the former. Every time he does something crazy and we don't respond and make him fucking bleed and make him hurt and make him pay for it, he gets emboldened and does something more and more and more bad and leads us to the situation we're in now, which is on the precipice of a wider conflict and, more importantly, causing thousands and thousands and thousands of innocent Ukrainian civilians and soldiers who would not even be in the military but for the genocidal invasion in 2022 to die and suffer. So let's go down the list. Let's look at history, and it will show inevitably every time he does something, we don't do enough, and it gets worse and worse. All right. So how did he start when he came to power in approximately 1999? Again, this is a pattern. He invaded Chechnya, and he committed crimes against humanity, including ballistic missiles into shopping malls, something he's done in Ukraine. What was our response? Basically nothing. And what happened next? Well, a couple years later, he used dioxin to poison Viktor Yushchenko, who was the leading pro-Western presidential candidate for Ukraine. Again, think about how outrageous that is. For one country to use an arguable weapon of mass destruction or poison to kill a candidate who they did not like for another sovereign country, a country they agreed was sovereign in agreements that were signed after the end of the Cold War. What was our response? Again, basically nothing. So what happened a couple years later? Just 2 years later, they did the same thing, but it was in a NATO country. England, the United Kingdom. In London, Alexander Litvinenko was killed when he was poisoned with polonium-210, a radioactive, highly dangerous, highly toxic substance. What was the response to the use of this dangerous substance to kill a British civilian inside British territory, NATO civilian inside NATO territory? An arguable act of war, certainly a severe act of aggression that required a severe response. Well, recall some diplomats, a few strongly worded letters. That's it. Well, did that make Vladimir Putin decide to moderate his behavior? Fuck no. It got worse. This time he invaded Georgia. He used the pretext of trying to protect ethnic Russians in South Ossetia, it's just a bullshit pretext, to invade a country that had been leaning towards the West and towards joining NATO and the EU and in other parts of the Western world. An invasion, war crimes, stealing land, stealing a country. The use of force, might is right. What was our response? Well, basically nothing. And so the next thing that happened was another invasion of another sovereign country and more war crimes. It was the criminal, genocidal invasion of Crimea in eastern Ukraine in February through May of 2014. And our response was to send some MREs and maybe send, some blankets. That's basically it. Not an adequate response whatsoever. And so the very next thing that happened is MH17. That is, a jumbo jet was fucking shot down by a surface-to-air missile with Russian-controlled militants or separatists, whatever the fuck you want to call those animals, killing 200 innocent Dutch civilians, 198. Again, that is a straight-up terrorist act, shooting down an airplane. Did we declare Russia a state sponsor of terrorism? Did we arm the Ukrainians to the teeth so they could take back their country? No, we basically did nothing. And again, what was the next thing that happened? Well, Russia went for broke and they started to interfere in the presidential elections and the fundamental core democratic processes of this country, the United States. In fact, interference in the 2016 presidential elections has led to a lot of Russian individuals actually being indicted by the FBI, and they're on an FBI wanted poster right now. And the response to that was an even more crazy and audacious poisoning of a NATO civilian inside a NATO country, this time using a bona fide, inarguable weapon of mass destruction. That is, in 2018, Skripal, who was a Russian defector, was poisoned with Novichok nerve gas. Novichok nerve gas is nothing to play with. That shit is like 10 times more potent than sarin nerve gas, which is fucking awful and incredibly dangerous and toxic and can spread very quickly. Multiple people almost died. And this use of a weapon of mass destruction for the second time inside a NATO country led to basically no serious response. Recall some diplomats, maybe some strongly worded letters. Again, did not declare Russia a state sponsor of terrorism. Finally, after all these things, what did Vladimir Putin do? We hadn't done anything when he interfered with the U.S. elections. We hadn't done really anything when he used weapons of mass destruction on NATO territory and all these invasions and all this fucking lunatic behavior. And so he invaded Ukraine in 2022. And even within that conflict, where he's engaged in an unprecedented campaign of international terrorism, genocide, crimes against humanity, kidnapping thousands of kids. I mean, shit off the charts, straight up Nazi shit from fucking World War II and worse. We haven't designated Russia a state sponsor of terrorism. We haven't even done all the economic sanctions we can do, because apparently there's still sanctions they can fucking issue. So, which is just baffling to me. And we have failed to arm the Ukrainians, who we owe an obligation, morally and legally, I think, because we disarmed them, promised to protect them, and took away their weapons, their nukes, and also their conventional weapons, bombers, and long-range cruise missiles, with which they could have effectively defended themselves in this conflict, and didn't. And we have an obligation to come to their aid and give them everything they need. We didn't give them long-range ATACMS ballistic missiles because we didn't want Russia to use ballistic missiles. Well, Russia's like, what fucking rules are you talking about? And so, naturally, Russia has used North Korean, and now they're getting Iranian ballistic missiles and Shahed drones, the worst people in the fucking neighborhood, giving these weapons to rain down on Ukrainian civilians, while we have MAGA Mike, Tiny Johnson, and the Russian cowards inside the House GOP MAGA movement, the Russian Putin movement, blocking aid to Ukraine on behalf of Vladimir Putin. So, what you see from this, and this is just a brief summary of the most outrageous things. I'm not including all the journalists and everything else because we'd fucking be here all night. Every time we do something inadequate to make Putin really suffer and really bleed and think twice about engaging in his preferred outrageous sociopathic behavior, he gets worse and worse and worse. And you know what? We can't keep making mistakes because he's gone so far up the ladder. The next step is a wider conflict in which we will have no choice but to become involved. Gotta change our ways. We've got to treat this motherfucker for what he is, a sociopathic, crazy piece of shit. He only understands force, power, and strength. God bless Ukraine. God bless America. I hope you learned a couple things and have a beautiful day.